And you can't possibly hit standards if you're going to have 90% of your non-carbon emission going offline.
That you can't simply take off the table a source of carbon-free energy, that it simply doesn't make sense.
The bigger question of advocacy is about our climate, it's about our way of life, it's about our economy and all that. But nuclear is a piece of that because it can provide cheap, clean energy, and energy is the elixir of any modern society.
Tri-Cities. It's 9 o'clock on Friday, and it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from TRIDEC, your local economic development council. And today we're going to talk about nuclear energy and how the role that it plays in working towards a carbon-free, clean energy future. So we've got a great panel of guests on today. I'm going to start off with John Kotek, who is the president of Nuclear Matters. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Also from Nuclear Matters is Dan Smith. He is the campaign manager for Nuclear Matters. Good morning, Dan.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Karl.
Locally for us here in the Tri-Cities, we have Nick Bumpaous. Today he's joining us as the co-founder of Clean Future Northwest. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning. How are you? Good.
And I got to tell you, like right off the bat, I just have so much jealousy over that microphone that you got, because like you've set the bar for
Does
voice
it sound that much?
and Coffee with Karl. Like I think you're so far, and we just started, like you got the best mic. So I'm just going to call out right now, Nick. Thanks for joining us. And also Jason Herbert, also again, joining us as the co-founder of Clean Future Northwest. Good morning, Jason.
Thanks, Karl. My mic game is not at Nick's level, but I'm very excited to be here with you again. So
I didn't want to get there because I'm so echoey. I know it's horrible, but I just had to, really call Nick out because it sounds so good. We all have to get our mic game up, I think.
You're gonna give me a complex, I'm gonna start using some solo cups with strings to do these things,
Well, speaking of solo cup, we always kick Coffee with Karl off talking about coffee or mugs. And for today's discussion, I chose my Energy Northwest mug that says, "The energy future is now," from Energy Northwest. It's from and Jason, you'll help me out with the name of the virtual event that you had last year.
Oh, our Public Power Forum.
Public Power Forum, yeah. So as a participant, I got this mug, but I think it's obviously what we're talking about today, and a good mug and kickoff. And when we were getting ready for today's coffee visit, Jason, you gave me an interesting stat about Columbia Generating Station, and it's, to kind of kick us off here, and the percentage of power that comes off of the Columbia Generating Station as far as the percentage of power generated in Washington. And I think you threw out that it's like 8 or 9% of the total power produced in the state from one facility, which is amazing, and that it produces equal to or greater than all of the solar and wind in the state, which is another good fact. And I think I wanted to bring that up as, it's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So that's my mug and story. So let's kind of reverse the order. We'll start with Nick. What do you got for a mug or a coffee story?
Oh boy, I got a good one. It's not really energy related, but I've had the opportunity for a few years to serve on the board of the United Way here in Benton and Franklin counties. And in 2018, we kind of piloted this event called the Festival of Trees, right? And it was to raise money for hunger and homelessness. And I got the opportunity to be on that committee. It was chaired by a community gal named Stacy West, who did a fantastic job. And at the end of that, she made cups for everybody that says, "Keep calm, I know a guy." And what we didn't know the entire time we were trying to put this brand new event together, right, is every time we said, we need this or we need that, and you're coming down to crunch time, inevitably in the room, somebody would say, I know a guy. And so she made these cool cups, and they're my favorite coffee cup, and I'm a coffee cup connoisseur. So
it's Perfect. And maybe a good message here as we talk about, strategies to help change the perception of nuclear power and, let people know how it is. Like, maybe that's our mantra, right? Like, hey, don't worry about it. I know a guy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How about John? What do you got for a mug or a coffee story for us?
I went the proud dad route. So I've got the one my daughter made for me for Christmas when she was 5 years old.
That's awesome.
She's now 13. So this mug is, I think it's pretty incredible for two reasons. One, I think she did an absolutely beautiful job, particularly considering she was 5 years old. And two, the fact that I've not broken it over 8 years is pretty astounding as well. So yeah, thanks.
Kudos to you, John.
Good job. Dan, how about you? What's your mug or coffee story this morning?
Certainly. So this actually, I'm at my parents' house this weekend before some travel. This coffee cup was one that was used by my grandfather. He was a captain in the Navy and served for 32 years. And very cool, he actually used this cup when he was a commanding officer of VP 30 in Jacksonville, Florida. And I actually didn't find this out until I was doing a project for school. When I was 10 or 11, I started asking him, can you tell me some stories from when you were in the Navy? And he told us that he was in an anti-submarine patrol squadron flying P-3 Neptune aircraft, and he was leading them during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And he had never told me that. He hadn't even told my dad that until I was doing this project for school when I was 10 or 11. So he actually ended up retiring with more than 10,000 accident-free flight hours. So a pretty incredible story that I think shows I have quite a legacy to live up to, but a good reminder.
That's awesome. So is it like a Navy mug?
Yeah, if you can see it here, it's got the seal here, and on the other side, got the United. Want to be careful with it. The United States Navy. So
yeah,
pretty incredible story.
That's a really incredible story. I am reminded of a story I read one time that Navy coffee has salt in it. Like when you're on the ship or something, they put salt in it. I don't know if it's true or I asked a Navy veteran on Coffee with Karl, and he said he didn't drink coffee, so we didn't really get verification of that. But I always wonder about drinking salt in coffee. So maybe we'll have to bring that up on a future webinar.
Yeah, I don't know if they had the best coffee on the subs, but I should mention a lot of the aircraft carriers he was on were probably powered by nuclear power. Something to think about.
There you go.
Great point. Great point. Okay, Jason, what do you got for us?
So I kind of went the same route as John here. So I think this is my second time on Coffee with Karl, and what I've realized is I only have one really good mug story. I've been living a very quiet, sheltered life. Apparently, everyone else is out doing exciting things with mugs, and I don't have that kind of experience. So once COVID gets over and opens up, I'm going to have to really get on that. But I asked my 5-year-old daughter last night which mug I should use, and she said this one, which says "Best Dad Ever." She got it for me for Father's Day last year, and she told me that she'd never seen me use it before. And I did use it once, and the reason is I think it holds like 32 ounces. So the coffee goes cold pretty quickly. However, she did assure me that it was something that was thought out months in advance. They didn't buy it at Target the day before Father's Day last year or anything like that. This was a very well thought out, handcrafted item that I got. But I thought that would be a good way to go in. And I guess John and I are on the same wavelength this morning.
Absolutely.
Like it. And I do have to say, and I'm not like a coffee expert or anything, but Jason, I don't think that, like a plethora of mugs has any indication on, your life and that you're getting out and stuff. So I wouldn't, just mugs don't measure, life stories. So,
That makes me feel better.
Okay.
Well,
let's start off our discussion this morning with John. And John, can you kind of kick us off and tell us about Nuclear Matters as an organization and the mission and what you guys are working on?
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks, Karl, and it's a real pleasure to be with you. I wish I could be out there in person. I've been traveling out to the Tri-Cities more than 30 years. Back to the day, I think my first visit out was when FFTF was still running, so that'll date me a little bit. And real pleasure to be joined, by Nick, Jason, and Dan. I'm Senior Vice President at the Nuclear Energy Institute, but also President of Nuclear Matters. Just assumed this role here a few months ago. I've been with NEI about 4 years. Was previously Acting Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy in DOE. Have a long history in the DOE space, and so when I took over as head of Nuclear Matters, I said, there's a real opportunity for us to get out there in some of these communities that are really looking at the next generation of nuclear, who understand nuclear for all it delivers today. And Nuclear Matters is the national coalition arm of the nuclear power industry. We've got a lot of folks already that are signed up to serve as advocates. We got over 600,000 advocates, in fact, who we work with to inform the public policymakers and others about the clear benefits of nuclear energy. And Dan will walk through this in some detail later. But we are seeing such a pivot now in terms of the dialogue around nuclear and the appreciation for the role that nuclear plays today and can play going forward, particularly as we strive to achieve aggressive decarbonization goals. Jason, of course, in Energy Northwest are living this firsthand, but, we've seen the new administration come in, the Biden administration, even during the campaign, was talking about how nuclear was important to achieving his decarbonization, climate, and jobs goals. We've seen that continue on through Senator Granholm, with Secretary Granholm and taking over at DOE. We're seeing a lot more interest in new nuclear. Obviously, you all are familiar with the conversation in Washington, but we're seeing it in a lot of other states around the country. Policymakers looking at nuclear as providing that firm, clean generation to supplement growing shares of wind, solar, storage, hydro to get to a clean energy system. And so that's really opened up the opportunity for us to build on this base of grassroots and grasstop supporters that we've got to ensure that when the debate about new nuclear really kicks in Washington or in other states, we're ready to act, and we're ready to bring voices, to the debate who really understand what's going on with nuclear and why it's important. And Dan's going to walk you through some of just what we've got planned and what we got going on. So thanks.
Oh, that's great. And I think that's a great way to kick our discussion off. And thinking of that, and number one, I did read your bio and saw that you spent some time in Idaho and both at INL and then with the Gallatin Group, and just I worked with both organizations previously, and I just from that aspect, it's awesome that you're bringing that experience along with what your experience with the Tri-Cities. But do you see some of the groups that have stood in opposition to nuclear power start to pivot? Because that seems like the question that I have, and it's interesting one, like in different say Northwest issues, like me being from Idaho, timber issues, right, Forest Service policy and stuff like that. But sometimes the environmental groups pivot because you would assume that they would be for carbon-free electricity and kind of fighting climate change. But how do we message or balance that with kind of pivoting them to being in favor of, or at least neutral on nuclear power? Is that kind of one of the challenges?
It is, and we're seeing that happen to a certain degree. One of the real landmarks was when the Union of Concerned Scientists came out, I think it was in 2018, with a report that talked about the decarbonization really threat that was posed by the potential shutdown of more nuclear plants. They of course insist on as do we, ensuring that the plants are well run. But they did point to the fact that well-run nuclear plants are worth keeping for their decarbonization benefits. So we're seeing that evolve. There are more and more groups, particularly left of center, that are focused on climate, that see a role for both today's nuclear and advanced nuclear. So groups like Third Way, C2ES, those organizations are increasingly helping to inform the debate about the importance of nuclear, particularly in filling that firm, clean role that I talked about. Jason, of course, is very familiar with how you can save consumers a lot of money if you've got that firm, clean on the system, all the good paying jobs you can create. So we're seeing more labor unions, for example, being very vocal in their support for nuclear. That helps, particularly with the Democrats. So we're certainly not as far along as I'd like to see us, or that we need to be, but the conversation is very much heading in the right direction.
Thanks. That's great. And so let's shift to Dan and John kind of talked about how do you do this? What are some of the strategies maybe that the Nuclear Matters goes after? And Dan, can you walk us through what that looks like and how do you do? And I'll just bring up, like, it seems like one of the places you have to start with is almost education on nuclear power and separate it from nuclear weapons, and then, like in our case here in the Tri-Cities, from nuclear cleanup, that kind of relates back to the Manhattan Project. But let's hear from Dan and see what does that look like? What are you guys working on, and really how can we all help?
Sure, happy to. And thank you, as John said, thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here. And over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to serve as the campaign manager for Nuclear Matters. And to John's point, we're not where we want to be, but we continue to make some great progress in making inroads, primarily with folks in the environment and the labor space, to recognize the value of tech-neutral clean energy solutions. I think there's more bipartisan support for nuclear than there's ever been. And we look forward to continuing to build on that, especially in Washington. We can get to that in a little bit. But to answer your initial question, so as John alluded to or mentioned earlier, we have 600,000 advocates across the country. 450,000 of those thereabouts are on Facebook, and 100,000 or so followers on Twitter. And so to your point about education and awareness, a lot of what we do is communicating with those folks and our followers to ensure that they understand that nuclear energy is our largest source of carbon-free energy, all of the benefits that it has from an economic, environment, and also a national security perspective. And to your point on education, we always make sure to add the word energy after nuclear to avoid any of those connotations. I think that's an important step. In addition, we have about 40,000 folks that we have that are emailable. So they're in our database. Those are folks that we can tap for opportunities to contact their legislators, share a message on social media, participate in a public comment period, and they're engaged, they are active. To give you an example, just after the election this year, we sent out a welcome to Congress alert, which was essentially to our full database, asking for them to urge their members to support pro-nuclear legislation. We had 2 action alerts that went out, resulted in over 1,500 advocates taking action, and almost 4,000 letters to legislators. Just gives you a good sense of some of the capabilities that we have and the ability to start to make sure that nuclear energy is a part of that conversation on the Hill. I think in addition to the social media and newsletter and email aspect of what we do, really that grassroots mobilization, it's also worth talking about our Advocacy Council. So we have a dozen or so folks on the Advocacy Council who are available to work with us on op-eds, testimonials during legislative periods, participating in a way that's credible and authentic for them. Probably the one you're most familiar with would be Carol Browner, former EPA administrator, but we have folks from all walks of life, a couple of former NRC commissioners, Dr. Pete Lyons, Dr. Jeff Merrifield, Stan Wise, former public service commissioner in Georgia, a wide range of experts. I'll also mention Karen Jones, from one of our public health experts, really important because we want to make sure we're a part of that public health conversation. And I give you those examples not to name drop, but to give you a sense of the wide breadth of issues that we want to cover. It's not just about the economic benefits. It's not just about the environmental applications and the need for this from a climate perspective. It's also about national security and geopolitical implications. So another thing to consider there in terms of some of our capabilities and what this looks like in practice. Another event that I want to highlight, and I won't spend too much talking about us. If you give me the full hour, I'll take it. One thing that we're doing that's very similar to what we're doing right now is really trying to build out our virtual event capabilities. So earlier this year, back in January, we had an opportunity to host an event called Progressive Policy under the Biden administration. Essentially, what do the next 4 years look like under this new administration? I think we have all seen a renewed emphasis on climate action that has been absent in DC over the past 4 years. And it's just a different opportunity. In some ways, we have to pick some of our battles in terms of what we want to engage on, but also presents a renewed chance for us to engage around nuclear energy. Had about 450 folks attend that virtually, and was great to see over 100 questions of people during a 45-minute panel who wanted to understand more about nuclear energy. So I'll just wrap that up by saying, there is interest out there in learning more about nuclear energy. I think there's a clear need for education. And what we've found and been encouraged by is that when we can reach folks with these messages, when we give them the opportunity to learn more and get involved, there is typically a shift in their perception and a willingness to get on board. So really excited about some of the progress we've made, and know that we can continue to build. And I'll finish here by just saying, if you do want to get involved, please reach out to info@nuclearmatters.com. We're happy to add you as an advocate, or discuss any ways you might want to help support our mission. So let me stop there.
Great. So would the goal of these campaigns, it sounds like, be to, play a role with your advocate network in having an outcome in public policy, but is there another component? I mean, we talked about education that does go out maybe through social media, that is more aimed at maybe folks that aren't on your advocacy network now, but just to change that perception. Because I think, and we'll talk about Washington State here in a minute with Nick and Jason, but one of the things that we've generally talked about here in Washington is, just trying to change the public perception and educate the public on, all the great things about nuclear power and carbon-free electrical generation. But is the Nuclear Matters campaign work on both, or is it really more aimed at the public policy decision makers?
Absolutely both. And I think John can speak to this perhaps better than I can, but the legislative outcomes are certainly, it's important for us to continue to make sure that the existing fleet is properly valued and we condition the environment for the success of advanced deployment. But on a very base level, we want to bring more people into the fold. Again, as I said, I think on social media, we see that as an opportunity to educate and engage folks. And hopefully we get them to a point where they're willing to mobilize. And so we're working with a big part of what we're trying to do right now is really just, let's get a bigger tent here. Let's find out who else from the environmental organizations, from labor organizations, is willing to work with us behind the scenes to advance some of our shared goals. And we're doing that from grassroots to grass tops. And what that looks like is certainly tailored to states. I don't want to skip ahead to Washington, because I know that Jason and Nick can speak to that far better than I can. But I will say we have just been refreshed and energized by some of the conversations that we've had out in Washington over the past few months with groups like yourself, and recognizing that there is this opportunity for education if we put it in front of the right people. So we're using the resources we have on social media and also via our newsletters to communicate and ask people to join us, become a part of this movement, and also understand that, we're not necessarily looking for every Nuclear Matters advocate to be transparently pro-nuclear. We want people who are advocating for the same things we are, which is a tech-neutral climate solution that uses all the tools in our toolbox. So I think there's significant opportunity, and hopefully that gets at your question. It is absolutely a balance between education and engagement and mobilization when the time is right. But John, is there anything that you would add to that?
Covered it well. Thanks, Dan.
Anytime.
That's great. Thank you. For those of us joining us on Zoom, I wanted to give a reminder that if you have a question for our panel, you could always ask using the question and answer feature at the bottom. If you're on social media, you can ask your question in the comment section. And as we go through our discussion today, we'll do our best to get to everybody's questions. But let's shift locally into Washington State and talk about Clean Future Northwest. Sorry for the sound effect in the background. I do have a pug that is kind of like my office mate, and pugs don't breathe really well. So if you hear any coughing or snorting, it's just my pug, Frankie. So
glad to have him with us.
So let's talk about Clean Future Northwest, and I'll start with Nick and ask Nick to kick us off and talk about Clean Future Northwest and how did you guys come together and what are some of your missions and goals, and kick it off to Nick.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I was listening to Dan and John speak. They brought up the word education a lot, right? And I was sitting here thinking, I'm a young guy, I'm a millennial, right? And age certainly isn't a factor here, but when I was growing up, right, Bill Nye the Science Guy was talking about climate change on TV when I was a kid every day, right? This has been kind of an issue and a structure in my life since the beginning, right? And so, I think for us, for guys like Jason and myself, and certainly others, right, age has nothing to do with it. We see the challenges in front of us with meeting, right, decarbonization goals and really affecting in a real way, right, our future when it relates to climate change. And as I dig into this more and I start to research and I become involved in the solutions in the world, you find out, right, that we as a society need dispatchable baseload power, right? Which means when you go to flip the light switch on and thousands of other people go to flip the light switch on all at the same time, the lights come on, right? When I run my washing machine for my laundry, it works. When I plug in, as we electrify the transportation grid, when I plug in my electric vehicle, the juice is there, right, to charge my car. And so when you start to look at this, you think there has got to be a tech neutral, broad range of solutions, right? And one of those being nuclear for baseload power to perfectly complement, in my opinion, and in Jason's and kind of Clean Future's mission, to perfectly complement other clean technologies like wind and solar and pumped hydro. And so that's kind of, I think, the impetus of where we started was we seen the model that Nuclear Matters is kind of used nationally in other groups. And it's a great model to bring regional and local and state stakeholders, community groups, nonprofits together around a very serious issue and to create a shared vision for that. And really let science and facts speak for themselves, right? And cut out all of the noise and say, how are we actually going to meet our goals for a clean energy future? And fortunately, we have some great technology that needs to be developed, but we really need to get everybody in the room and start to support that. So I think that's where Clean Future really started. And I'd like to, Jason, jump in here and add anything else you want, but I think that's kind of the core of our mission.
Yeah, I think Nick, you covered it pretty well. And Nick and I kind of had this idea like last fall, and we've been getting it up and running and setting this up. And our goal really was to bring in a variety of different stakeholders here in Washington State and in the Northwest that all have, different interests, but want to see us in being successful in meeting our state clean energy goals of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045, and doing that in a way that's both maintains reliability on the grid as well as affordability. Washington State's blessed in that we're, either the first or second cleanest energy producing state in the country, depending on the year. And we also have some of the lowest rates in the country. And that's, a huge economic driver for our state and for our region. And we don't, decarbonization and maintaining those kind of leadership aspects in those two areas are not mutually exclusive if we take the right approach to them. And what we've seen from studies like the one put out by E3 in 2020 and others is that there is a way to get to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045, kind of using an integrated resource system where you're, rather than viewing resources as competitors, they're complementing one another. And so, especially when you have things like advanced nuclear coming online that's extremely flexible, extremely dispatchable, can integrate really well with renewables. What we've seen through all the modeling is, on the low end through 2045 with, additional penetration by electric vehicles as well as by renewables like wind and solar, you're going to need to develop anywhere from, on the low end, it's 25 to 30 gigawatts between now and 2045 of new generating capacity just to meet that future load and maintain reliability. If you want to do that with just wind and solar and storage, that number jumps up to anywhere to 110 to 120 gigawatts, which is a much heavier lift. And that doesn't even take into consideration the transportation or the transmission system. So what we've really focused on is trying to kind of bring all these stakeholders together in Washington State, from labor to the business community to the utilities to think tanks and environmental groups and others, and say, look, we all have the same goal, which is 100% carbon-free electricity, but we need to approach it and we need to start planning for it now. Because 25 years sounds like a long time, but all of our coal goes offline now in 2025. And not only that, but we can no longer import coal generated from outside of the state unless you want to pay $150 per megawatt hour penalty on it. And then post 2030, we have to be greenhouse gas neutral, where natural gas starts to get phased out and gets penalized. So even by 2030, we're starting to see a capacity deficit in the Northwest region of about 8 gigawatts. That's a huge amount, and it's essentially going to lead to a lot of volatility on the grid if we don't start planning now for resources to replace those. And to Nick's point, what we've really seen is the issue isn't that people are opposed to nuclear energy, they just don't know enough about it. And so we really need to get out there and kind of a concerted effort to spread the news and explain why nuclear energy as part of this larger integrated system is so vital to achieving our clean energy goals. And hopefully then Washington State can serve as kind of a leader for other states in the country and around the world on kind of what this integrated system looks like that's balanced and affordable. But it really is going to require a lot of planning and collaboration. And so our goal is really to have Clean Future Northwest be kind of that tip of the spear to go out and do what groups like Nuclear Matter and Third Way and ClearPath are doing at the federal level, and take it to a more localized state and regional approach.
Oh, that's great. And I mean, on the Washington side, I think it's interesting in meeting with leaders from X Energy, one of the advanced reactor companies that's planning to build, their first reactor at the Energy Northwest site here locally, that when they talk about, because it was a competitive Department of Energy process, who got those, awards, that they pointed out that the two companies that were selected had both partnered with Energy Northwest. And a big reason for that is that Washington State does have the CETA standard. So as you talk about, by 2045, that all electrical generation won't involve any carbon emissions. And so I think that's a good point to bring up, in that, how do we get to this carbon-free future? How do we get to this clean energy future as a country or as a state? And the balance of regulation and policy, along with the commercial side, and something be economically viable. There's a good case in point of hopefully that is a way that we can go, even as a country, to put that in. And I was going to maybe jump back to John quickly, because it made me think of a Senate hearing that I watched a month ago in the Energy Committee, and they were talking about advanced nuclear and nuclear power. But it was great that even Chairman Manchin gave a shout out to, like, why are we closing these existing plants? Why are existing plants going offline? Is it because we put too many incentives in renewables and everything else? And he was talking about having a future hearing about, like, any nuclear plant's going to shut down in the U.S. We need to talk to them because we can't afford to lose that baseload. And I think that seemed like a great comment. I was really encouraged to hear them talk about that. But John, do you think nationally we'll start to see more of that? I think that's kind of a recognition of the role that nuclear plays within our footprint, right?
I think you're exactly right. And Senator Manchin in particular has continued to be very vocal on that subject, and is really calling attention to the fact that we're going to be kicking ourselves, as we try to decarbonize, and we look back on having shut down plants that could be running today and creating tremendous amounts of clean electricity. Just for folks who don't have a sense of the scale of the clean energy that comes from a nuclear power plant, the Energy Information Administration says there are just north of 10,000 power stations connected to the grid in the United States. 54 of those are nuclear power stations. Those 54 out of 10,000 produce 20% of our electricity. Okay, that gives you a sense of the scale of how big these generators are. And increasingly, I was pleased to hear you mention the X Energy project. Very excited about that, about the other advanced reactor demo project, as well as the SMR project there in Idaho. It shows you that there's a real market for new nuclear that's emerging, in addition to keeping today's nuclear online. I think we got to remember that it goes beyond just the US. I think that there's a lot of interest outside the United States in these new nuclear technologies. If we can demonstrate them here, we can create jobs, we can create technological leadership and US influence by exporting civil nuclear technologies. Another thing that I'm really intrigued about with the X Energy design is, because it's a higher temperature design, it gives you the chance to use that high temperature process heat to help decarbonize parts of the energy economy that are difficult to electrify. So when you think about industrial uses of high temperature heat, that type of design can play a big role. And then to the comment made about whether this is going to be government policy or whether there are other factors that are going to drive us in this direction. I think it's important to remember, the first really big utility commitments to completely decarbonize were actually made during the last administration, when they weren't focused on carbon and climate. But there's so much in the way of a recognition within the energy industry, and frankly, a demand from the biggest customers, that they want to decarbonize their own energy use. They want to decarbonize that of their supply chains. And so I think, while it's going to take a while for the policy environment to get lined up right, we've seen two things. One, smart policy can drive increased demand for new nuclear. And two, there's going to continue to be a pressure from kind of the customer side and the utility side to move towards decarbonization, even despite us not having a national policy and framework to operate within. So thanks, Karl.
Yeah, no, that, very well said. And I kind of flipped on us. I want to go back to Nick and Jason and just talk about kind of the next question, like we talked about with Nuclear Matters, and that is for Clean Future Northwest. What are some next steps that you guys are working on? And you know, you talked about building collaboration, and Nick, I think you set it up pretty well, talking about technology neutral, clean energy generation. But what are some next steps maybe that you guys are working on, or some goals? And from the local community, obviously, talk about the Tri-Cities. We're have always been very pro-nuclear. We understand the economic benefit and the even the environmental benefits that we're talking about now. But what can we do locally, and how can we all support Clean Future Northwest?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with us locally here in the Tri-Cities, right? We understand the technology. I would add to, in economic benefits, we've lived around commercial nuclear energy generation, in most of our lives. We understand the technology. And I think first and foremost, right, probably a priority that will never go away for us is education, right? And educating those, whether it be right here in the community or across Washington State or in the Pacific Northwest, as to the technology, right, in advanced nuclear generation, and educating them on the benefits and really how we create a clean future, right, that integrates solar and wind and every other technology we can come up with. After World War II, every other country in the world looked at us and said, how are they delivering affordable and reliable energy to their entire country? They've created the interstate highway grid that has connected, right, their entire country together. And a lot of countries, I believe, looked at us and said, look at the United States and look how they have done this in the leadership role. And they've really taken us as a model. And I think that's where we need to be in the future of energy production, as a model for the rest of the world. And I think that starts with education. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick hit it. And as far as kind of like the concrete next steps, is we have a website that we're going to get ready to launch here. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We're just working out some of the last minute bugs. Nick and I are doing this altruistically. This isn't our day job, but we saw this need, and we saw the need to really, get everyone pulling in the same direction, using their resources in a way that's effective, so that we're combining resources rather than just kind of doing these single attempts to get the message out, and have kind of one group where these things can flow through from the the great materials that we get at the national level from groups like Nuclear Matters, C2ES, and others, and take that and really have a way to disseminate the information that's coming out. Every day I see a new study that comes out from some academic organization or the UN or whoever it might be, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, talking about the important role that nuclear has. But getting that message out to your average citizen is difficult. And we've done some polling here in Washington State, and we've seen that about 60% of the population falls into this category of, we're not opposed to nuclear, we're not supportive of nuclear, but we're open to it. We want to learn more. And to us, that's a big indicator that we really need to get out and start telling the story, both on the extreme benefits that we've derived from the existing fleet. Like you said at the beginning of this, Columbia at one station accounts for 8 to 9% of Washington State's electricity. At Energy Northwest, we have wind facilities, we have solar and storage facilities as well. I think we believe in renewables in the Tri-Cities especially, but they need to be part of that larger system when combined with advanced nuclear. And so we need to get that message out on, one, how all these things work together, but two, explain what these new technologies are going to be able to do, the improvements that they've made. And I think it's really a good American story. I mean, we're talking about technological innovation and progress. I think this is the new frontier for nuclear energy. And, I think for 30 some odd years, we didn't really innovate a lot. Most of the existing reactors that are running were built. Columbia is one of the newest ones, and it was built in 1984. I think it's the 4th or 5th youngest plant in the country right now. And that's kind of crazy to think about. And when we look at nuclear energy, we've barely scratched the surface of the potential on what could come down the road. I mean, you have fusion reactors, thorium reactors, a traveling wave reactor from TerraPower. And I think a lot of the the negatives that people associate, like our used fuel, which I think the public would call waste, but it's not, because we only use about 5% of the energy in that fuel. A lot of those things could power the reactors of the future. And so to me, where we're going here, if we're looking out at the future and how we have a clean energy economy that's powered by carbon-free resources, not just in the US, but around the world, for global leadership on nuclear, we have to be the ones to innovate and really develop these technologies. And once we get through Gen 4, then there's another generation that comes online, and this innovation will beget more innovation. And as we move forward and start to do these things, it kind of becomes a rolling snowball, where you're getting more and more efficient and safe technologies that are ideal to meet a carbon-free grid, where you have a large penetration of renewables and can really integrate well and mix with those well and be cost effective. And so from the modular systems that we're seeing from SMRs and advanced reactors, that's going to be a huge step forward, both in the size of the facilities with a much larger or much smaller size, but also in the costs, because you're not going to be building custom components out at the site and having such a long lead time of procurement. You're going to be able to manufacture a lot of things off-site and build them on-site. And so it's transformational, and we think that message really needs to get out there. But unfortunately, the challenges that we're facing from a capacity standpoint and from a resource adequacy standpoint on what resources we're going to need in the future aren't waiting for us. Those are coming soon. So all of those messages really need to get out there, and we need to have a debate about, how seriously do we want to take addressing climate change in Washington State? If we're serious about this goal, here are the solutions that are on the table. And I think the big thing too is I've often heard people say, well, we need battery technologies to develop further. We need other things to happen for us to become carbon free. The real message is we have the technologies now. We just need to deploy them. I mean, we have the clean energy technologies that we need for the future. And that's, I think, a very compelling story to tell, and one that we can have a lot of success here in 25 years to meeting the goals of our clean energy transformation.
That's a great point. And maybe a question for both Nick and Jason, locally in Washington State, and then for John and Dan nationally. But in this campaign generally that we're speaking about, are we trying to refute another group's fear or concern about nuclear energy? Or are we really focused on that? To Jason's point, 60% of the people said, I'd like to learn more about nuclear. Is it really, we're in opposition to other groups that are just like, no nuclear, no way? Or is it really about informing, policymakers and people at the grassroots level, and just giving them more information, helping them understand how effective it is, and what's the goal? And is it different in Washington, maybe with, some of the goals of Clean Future Northwest than it would be nationally? And let's just start locally with Nick and Jason. What do you think it is? Is it more of grassroots education and then bringing people up, or is it just really kind of refuting groups that are opposed to nuclear energy?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Thoughts.
I think we've seen a big shift, as John kind of alluded to earlier with UCS and others, where there aren't that many groups that are just outright opposed to nuclear energy at this point on the environmental side. I mean, I think they would express concerns, and they think that there are other options besides nuclear, but they're more and more keeping an open mind to it. So I think part of it is really engaging in that dialogue, which I think as an industry, we've started to take very seriously over the last several years, and we need to continue to build on that, but not to be rebutting claims, but to be having conversations about really the benefits that advanced nuclear can provide, and that nuclear energy currently provides, providing 56% of our carbon-free electricity across the state. And then I do think there's the second component, which is the grassroots kind of outreach and education that's going to be equally vital to make sure that the general public is comfortable with what's going on and understands how this is going to work and what the end goal is here, which is carbon-free electricity. So I see it kind of as a parallel track, but really, I feel like we're in a much better spot. It doesn't mean our job is done, but we need to continue to have constructive conversations where we're really engaging and listening to what the concerns are and answering those concerns in a well thought out way with the data that we have behind us that supports, our arguments.
Yeah.
If I may add to that, Carl, just a little, and I'll be short. I think what Jason said is fantastic, right? What I also want to add is, with policymakers and even the general public, right, is really recognizing the challenge that is in front of us, right? Think about this in historical terms, what this transition for the world and for the United States is, right, into a new source of energy production, and doing that in a way that's affordable. I've heard affordable a few times. I think about that personally a lot, right? Because our energy consumption, right, as a state or as a region or as a country, is only going to grow. We're only going to use more energy, which is a good thing, right? Using more energy means more productivity, right? Means better quality of life. And so we're only going to use more, especially as other technologies advance. And so I think, just to add to that is really telling the true story of the actual hurdle that we're faced with here in attacking climate change, looking at it from a science-based, fact-based approach, and be willing, whether it be policymakers or the community, to try to understand the innovations that are needed, right, and understand the technology as they are now and invest in that future. Because I think that future is bright. And when you start to add in the economic benefits to job creation, right, and training the next generation of skilled workforce in whatever this technology leads us into, it becomes pretty exciting. So I have a very bullish view on it.
Great point. Very well said. And then, John and Dan, from the national perspective, are there groups that are just vehemently against nuclear energy, or is it really more that grassroots education?
There are some. I'd say a lot of the more well-known environmental groups are starting to take a little more nuanced position because they do understand the important role that that nuclear plays today and can play going forward. They, so I think that is evolving. A few things about the national picture that really kind of underscore things that Nick and Jason just said. One, as we have talked to people about their views on nuclear, we do find that when people come to understand the role that nuclear can play alongside wind, solar, hydro, and storage to get to an affordable, reliable, decarbonized system, that really helps bump up support for nuclear considerably. The fact is, while the numbers may not look great in terms of public support for nuclear, the depth of understanding isn't particularly deep, and which is not surprising. A lot of folks don't live this issue like we do, and don't have so many other things to contend with. They don't take a deep dive into the pros and cons of nuclear. But so when you bring those positive attributes to the discussion, support goes way up. When it comes to when you do need to refute issues, and issues of cost and waste tend to be the ones that come up first. The cost one is increasingly informed by this understanding that there's a difference between cost and value. And so while something might look really inexpensive on they call LCOE, levelized cost of electricity basis, if all it's going to do is bring you more electricity at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you've already got plenty, that's different than something that can provide clean electricity 24/7, 365. The recent tragic events in Texas really underscored the importance and value of a resource like nuclear that has on-site fuel supply, where you're not worried about weather conditions or the ability of a pipeline or rail cars full of coal to get to their destination. So that's really helped. As have things like the study Jason mentioned earlier that E3 did. That those findings have been repeated across the country as our member utilities commit to decarbonize. The first thing they're finding is we need firm, clean generation. That's why you see Duke with 11 nuclear reactors saying, we're going to relicense all of them. Dominion with their 4, same thing. We're going to relicense all of them. Okay. And they're all saying something new that looks like nuclear, right? That's firm and carbon free is going to be an important part of our portfolio in the 2030s. That's why there's so much interest in these advanced reactor demonstration projects that you all and others are participating in. The last thing I'll mention is the importance of trusted advocates. Because people don't spend a lot of time digging into this issue, they look to others who they trust, whose views they trust. And the fact that you've got, Nick and a lot of leaders in labor who really know this technology out there speaking about it, that makes a difference. The fact that you got a Bill Gates out there talking about it, that makes a difference. Governor Inslee, I was on a panel with him a few weeks ago talking about nuclear, and he jumped right in talking about how excited he was about the advancements in nuclear technology going on in Washington State. He's a virtue signaler, right, for the clean energy community. And if he's on board, that's going to change some minds. And then President Biden, right, including it in his plans. So the more people who know, and that's why it's so important that we get more advocates through Nuclear Matters. People, like those in your community who know this technology, they aren't paid spokespeople, they just know it, they work it. That makes a difference. So sorry, a bit of a long answer, but there was a lot to unpack.
That's great.
No, it's a really good point. And I think you've just explained what Dan talked about earlier, and that's your strategy, and that these advocates, and the social media term influencers, right? You want the people that can, through their networks, or maybe showing up to a hearing, or giving a public comment, or probably a multitude of ways that people can kind of like show up, be a trusted voice, be that advocate for nuclear power.
Without a doubt, that was a tough answer to follow. I'll just add on two things. One thing that's been very encouraging for us is, and this is a bit of an in-house term, but we have what we call super advocates. And these are people who have been in the fold for some period of time. And we ask them, are you interested in taking the next step in your advocacy journey? Would you write a blog post, author a letter to the editor? Would you attend a virtual town hall on our behalf? And just over the past year, we've seen 500, 600, 700 folks who responded to us and said, I want to take that next step. I'm ready to advocate in a meaningful way because I believe in your mission and what you're doing, and I believe in the value of nuclear power. And I think that's because we've had the opportunity to educate them. And that goes back to something that we've really focused on over the past year. I will say one small silver lining of the pandemic is a lot of the legislation that we expected to activate around was on pause as legislatures rightfully focused on COVID-19 relief. And so we took a step back and we said, what are the gaps in this coalition? What do we need to fill? We looked at environment, we looked at labor, we looked at public health, we looked at environmental justice, we looked at all these emergent conversations. And we've had the opportunity to talk to quite a few groups and individuals over the past year and a half, I'll say. And what's been very encouraging is oftentimes they come into that conversation skeptical. And by the end of it, even if they're not necessarily willing to join the cause that day, they're open to it. There's a receptiveness to it. And so I think there is a significant opportunity as we continue to have these conversations and understanding, as Jason pointed out earlier, there's a way that nuclear energy and the advanced fleet can also contribute to the workforce transition. A huge part of this that often isn't talked about in terms of the goals is, where do these jobs go? I think small modular reactors and the next generation of nuclear energy have significant potential in that regard. So like I said, hard to follow that answer from John. I think you covered it very well, but we are encouraged by a lot of the conversations we've had, and there's certainly more work to be done.
No, so that actually did add to the discussion. Thanks. We're just down to about 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to get to a couple questions, and then maybe we'll get everybody, a minute to wrap up. But just want to thank everyone in advance for your time today. This has been a really good discussion. The more that we have, I definitely learn, and as TRIDEC, we want to be a partner and advocate both at the federal level and obviously at the state level and local level to do what we can, because we talk about economic development and economic growth. To your point you just made, Dan, about workforce and the jobs that are out there, and Nick, trained workforce, skilled workforce that can meet those demands. That's our mission too, and we want to always be a part of that. But we do have a question from Michael Haygood in the audience today that wanted to give a shout out to John.
Hey, Mike.
And, so his first question, I think we talked about it a little bit. You mentioned this before, John, but could you please address the future role of nuclear integrated energy systems, including their contribution to the creation of a possible hydrogen economy?
Yeah, and so great question from Mike, and it will come as no surprise that Mike is one of the pioneers of the integrated energy systems concept, going back more than a dozen years. So great to hear from Mike. And there's just so much opportunity there, because to the point made earlier, the president's goal isn't to decarbonize the grid, although that's part of it. It's to decarbonize the economy by 2050. Right. So that goes so much further than just the grid. Folks forget the grid is just over a quarter, I think, of our greenhouse gas emissions. So, you think about decarbonizing transportation, industrial uses, the ag sector, right? There's so much more that needs to be done to get to a net zero and carbon energy economy, that we're going to need to make best use of all the energy resources we've got, and nuclear, by virtue of its distinct characteristics, and particularly given the range of technologies you can bring to bear here, can do so much more than just electricity. And in starting to think about nuclear as part of an integrated system that's helping decarbonize not just the grid, but these other energy end uses, I think just represents an enormous opportunity.
Yeah, we TRIDEC has hosted and helped partner and create an effort here locally called the Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative. And just a couple of weeks ago, Jason's actually co-chair of our nuclear subcommittee, and we had a great presentation from a scientist from INL, and he talked exactly about that integrated solution. And I think Tri-Cities' role in advanced reactor demonstration projects is going to be huge, but we need to start planning for that integration in the future. And that's what, Jason and his co-chair, Diane Howard, have led to some of those discussions, so that it's not just the electrical generation, your point, John, but, we can integrate these solutions. And I think the presentation that we had, I was really encouraged because he talked about, this model that evidently in Idaho Falls, they have a lab scale setup of this, where you actually take, waste streams from agriculture or, woody biomass, you can bring them in. The outputs are amazing. So it's not just electricity, could be hydrogen, could be, biofuels, could be all these other things. And there is even a role to transfer and sequester some of the carbon out of even petrochemicals and, put them into these integrations. So that model is really, really excited. And again, from an economic development point, we're just excited to, to partner on this and see what can be done for the future. We're down to 4 minutes, so I'm cutting it pretty close, but why don't we move into wrap-ups? And again, this has been a great discussion for, from TRIDEC's perspective and from our community's perspective. Obviously, we're all in, but we want to do anything that we can to help support both federally and locally the mission of both Nuclear Matters and Clean Future Northwest. So let's start with John. You want to kick us off on some closing remarks?
Yeah, just really want to thank you, Karl, and the whole TRIDEC organization for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm seeing more interest, more excitement about a next generation of nuclear than I've seen, I think, over my entire career. And it's really a great time to see the Northwest and other communities in the country embracing this opportunity that nuclear presents to help decarbonize the grid, the larger energy economy, to bring clean, safe nuclear energy, not just to the US, but around the world. And I just want to thank you all for being a part of it. Thanks for your time.
John, yeah, I look forward to meeting you in person in the future someday.
Likewise.
How about you? Do you have a closing remark for us this morning?
Yeah, I'll just add on to what John said, and no pun intended, truly energized by this conversation with you all and the opportunity that we have in Washington, I think, to take not only, pockets of support that do exist with the great work that you all are doing and across the state, but also to take hold of that 60% and educate, engage, give them a chance to learn more and see if they'd be willing to support our nation's largest source of carbon-free energy. And so from that perspective, just excited about the path forward. Know that there is work to be done, but I do think that the next generation of nuclear energy is uniquely equipped to be a part of that flexible, tech-neutral system to decarbonize the economy. As John mentioned, it's about more than just the electrical grid. And just looking forward to continue the conversation. Thank you very much for having us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time. Let's go to Jason next, and then we'll have Nick wrap us out with some closing comments. But go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just Karl, thank you for hosting us here and for all the work that TRIDEC's done. And you mentioned MCI and the great work that's coming out of there. And I think what this conversation has really shown is that, the applications and the benefits that we're discussing and that we have in the future as advanced nuclear is, commercially demonstrated and comes online is really impressive. And we need to just continue to work and move forward and essentially grab the bull by the horns and get it done. We don't have a huge timeline, especially here in the Northwest, to where, we start facing pretty serious capacity challenges and needs for additional resources on the grid. And that means that, we need to start planning and really bring stakeholders together and make sure everyone has a good understanding of where we're going. And I think all of these groups that are here today and all the work that everyone's doing is going to be integral to that happening. And so I couldn't be happier with where we are now and where we're going in the future. I think it's, no pun intended again, it's a really bright future that we have in front of us. Dan stole my energized, but I'll go with bright. So,
well, the next time that we're all together, we'll have to have a future webinar about, and whoever comes up with the best pun intended pun maybe wins a free coffee cup or something.
I need coffee mugs, so that would be great.
That's right. All right, Nick, what do you got for us? I get some closing remarks that kind of sum up our time together. And thanks a lot for your time and for your work on Clean Future Northwest and in your day job too. You're a great partner, and it's great to have you in our community.
I appreciate that. No, it's a privilege to be here. I appreciate everybody. Not repeating, I think Jason and Dan and John all put it very eloquently in their remarks. One thing I guess I'll add to the conversation is, born and raised in the Tri-Cities, right? Born and raised in Washington State, the Pacific Northwest. I'm proud of the leadership that the state of Washington has showed over these last few years in this space. I'm proud of the organizations here in the community that really take a leadership role, and I'm proud to have relationships and partnerships with fantastic organizations like Nuclear Matters and NEI. One thing I'll add is the future is bright, right? And the future is bright also for the workforce. In my day job, I'm proud to have served a 5-year, 10,000-hour apprenticeship program as a pipe fitter, steam fitter, welder with United Association. And in my day job, I also am the president of the Central Washington Building Trades Council, which represents ironworkers and electricians and boilermakers, right, and plumbers and every construction trade that you could think of. And I can tell you, I cannot think of a better workforce and a better group of people, right, to build, right, the next generation of our energy fleet. The skills specifically, I don't want to be too specific here, but the skill here specifically in the Tri-Cities, right, that we've, had the opportunity to develop over decades of work out at Hanford, work on our data centers and our high-tech infrastructure at Intel down in Portland. The Pacific Northwest really is uniquely positioned to have not only the best workforce now, right, to develop these technologies and help build them, but the best workforce to evolve into whatever that future technology is. So I'll just make a pitch for the workforce because I think the future is bright, and we can create apprenticeship opportunities and jobs and the skills of the future as we do it, and really help define the future economy.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for your time today. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate this discussion. And again, just from TRIDEC perspective and from a local community perspective, lend all of our support in all your efforts. And thanks for the job that you're doing. And we look forward to working together more in the future and accomplishing these goals. So thanks everybody for your time this morning, and have a great day and great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.